Good morning. My name is Reverend Carolyn Paterno, and I am the senior minister here at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Congregation. And on behalf of the congregation and Dan's family, I welcome you all. I thank you for coming this morning as we mourn the death and celebrate the life of Dan Ewers. I invite you into a communion of centering, prayer, and blessing as we begin. Spirit of life and of love, in all the ways known and named. May a spirit of calm and a robust feeling of love rise up in the hearts of those who most acutely grieve in this hour. May the coming together of community, of family and loved ones, may this be for this family, Whitney and Raylan especially, a sense of comfort and support that they will hold on to in the days to come. May all here who are grieving find solace in this moment of communal grief, and may we be reminded that grief is a reminder of love. We give thanks for this hour. We give thanks for Dan's life. And together we say, amen. 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 The chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, and we light this symbol whenever we gather for a rite of passage or for worship services. And this morning, Whitney's mother, Carrie, and Whitney and Dan's daughter, Raylan, will light the chalice. And they light the chalice to these words. We light this chalice in Dan's honor, in honor of all that he meant to his dearly beloved. We light this chalice in honor of the sorrow that is born of love, as will be the eternal flame of Dan's memory. So the chalice light reminds us that love is strong as death. We light this chalice by the strength of the community here gathered. Thank you, Raylan. Thank you, Carrie. In these moments, we look to the poets and the saints and the sages to somehow articulate what we cannot do for ourselves. And so in this moment, Michelle will share a poem by the poet, Dan O'Donoghue. Michelle.
No one knows the wonder your child awoke in you, your heart a perfect cradle to hold its presence. Inside and outside became one as new waves of love kept surprising your soul. And now you sit bereft. Inside a nightmare, your eyes numbed by the sight of a grave no parent should ever see. And you will wear this absence like a secret locket, and always wondering why such a new soul was taken home so soon. So let the silent tears flow, and when your eyes clear, perhaps you will glimpse how your eternal child has become the unseen angel and persuades the moon to send new gifts ashore. So ends the reading.
The title of that poem is For a Parent on the Death of a Child. And in this moment, death is a greater mystery than it is typically for one who was taken home, as the poet said, too soon, so young. And so we gather to make meaning and to pour our mourning into one vessel. And part of the way that we do that is to hear from those who loved the dearly departed, Dan, so fiercely and so well for his entire life. And so I'm going to begin by inviting Charlie, Dan's father, forward. He will begin by reflecting on Dan's life and their relationship. And we all hold in our hearts the courage and the strength that it takes for those so close to Dan to stand before you and to speak and share and make themselves as vulnerable as they are. So I begin with thanksgiving, Charlie, and welcome you forward.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to honor Dan, to remember him, to celebrate his life. I'd like to share a poem that I wrote about 20 years ago, following the death of our 18-year-old nephew, Patrick. Sadly, the sentiments expressed are quite appropriate for this occasion. As is our custom with short poems at All Souls, I will read it twice, not because we deliberately choose difficult texts, but with the understanding that it's hard to take in the nuances of a poem on just one reading. It's called The Edge. The Edge. We're inching toward it all along, and I'm sort of comfortable with that, knowing it's in front of me, down the road somewhere, predictable to a degree, you know? Our elders precede us, going over in their turn, showing us how the final steps will be. Something we all know that someday we all must do. But every once in a while, we look back and notice a youth behind us has left our line. How disconcerting of him to undermine our sense of order. The belief that we sustain that somehow this all makes sense. The edge. We're inching toward it all along, and I'm sort of comfortable with that, knowing it's in front of me, down the road somewhere, predictable to a degree, you know? Our elders precede us, going over in their turn, showing us how the final steps will be, something we all know that someday we all must do. But every once in a while, we look back and notice a youth behind us has left our line. How disconcerting of him to undermine our sense of order, the belief that we sustain that somehow this all makes sense. The belief that we sustain that somehow this all makes sense. Here we are, 11 days since Dan left us, and I'm sad to say that his passing makes no more sense than Patrick's did 20 years ago. Why is someone so young, so generous, so full of life snatched from us? I could posit a rationalization or spout a bromide, but neither would satisfy. Dan's death makes little, if any, sense, but his life certainly did. Dan cared. He cared about his wife Whitney and his daughter Raylan. He cared about his brother Mike and his wife Rachel and their children, Asher, Cece, Gwen, Esme, and Ron, all of whom are with us today. He cared about his mom and me. He cared about his numerous aunts and uncles and cousins and in-laws. He cared about his friends, co-workers, and the patrons he served. He cared about his pets. Lord, the list goes on. He even cared about the New York Giants. That football team being the most consistent source of heartbreak in the last decade of Dan's life. But more than just caring, Dan showed love through his actions, be it lending a hand, lending an ear, or giving a much-needed hug. And Dan showed his love through his words, as I witnessed over the years when he was with old friends or at family gatherings. The words, "I love you," were not foreign to his lips. 2 weeks ago on a Sunday, Michelle and I stopped by Dan's place to drop off Raylan. We chatted briefly and hugged in parting. The following Tuesday, Dan was talking to Michelle on speakerphone, and I joined in the conversation, planning his family's visit to our house the next day for dinner. Plans secured, Dan closed with, "I love you, Mom. Love you, Dad." To which we both responded, "We love you too, Dan." That was the last time we spoke to him. Within 2 hours, he was gone. Nothing can fill the hole in our lives left by Dan's absence, but we are strengthened knowing that we parted in a state of grace, lifted by the knowledge of our deep love for each other. Dan and the love he shared will live in our hearts, and that will be with us for the rest of our lives. That makes all the sense in the world. I'd like now to introduce Dan's brother, Mike, and his good friend, Jeff Bucci.
That's excellent. Oh, thanks. All right, go for it. All right. Wow. Dan wouldn't have expected this. Just the large showing of people and me standing here. All right, so hi everyone. Before I begin this speech and rant, as it's definitely going to get to, I want to ensure that everyone knows how deeply I loved this guy. A true friend, a great person. I'll always carry a piece of him in my daily routines. My wife and son couldn't be here, but they adored Dan and knew that his presence in our lives was a positive. And so my intention here is to not cry, talk a little bit about Dan, and fill everyone actually with some joy and laughter. Dan always saw those things out there, regardless of if it was good, bad, whatever. And so in such a terrible time, I want to try to give some light here. All right, so my name is Jeff Bucci. I was Dan's friend for 26 years. Actually lived together for a while. Catch you later, you'll hear some stories. From the beginning, we were young adults together, acted like we knew everything, but at the same time, we were smart enough to know that we didn't, so kind of kept us in line, I guess. We could enjoy just many things together. We played different sports. We're both jocks, but different sports. So we'd enjoy watching them, playing them on the side, making mixtapes, for those of you of a certain age may recall. Then we'd actually reword songs sometimes, like a Journey song or something, and just a small town Dan living in a, whatever, something like that. And we do things like that. We still do it. Mike's writing, though, it leaves something to be desired. But, so we do these random things and, just regular stuff like prowling at Walmart before wrestling matches to get those terrible nutrition bars. Anyway, a true friend He was there for you. He's respectful to your parents, which meant a lot to me. He genuinely cared about your interests. He was willing to help you if you needed help, just with anything. It didn't matter. He was willing to help. And because of all those such endearing, wonderful, truly lovely qualities, that's why he was able to get away with being such a pain in the rear end. Being around such just a wise guy, smart alecky type, it takes its toll on you. That's why I have the gray hairs, mostly, not my children, it's Dan. But the good news is that, as you're probably already noticing, I'm equally as annoying as he could be. So I tried to give as good as I got. But that's enough about me. We're here to talk about Dan. If he were here now, and this is an actual thing, if he were here now, he would say, Jeff, I'm tired of you already. That is a Dan phrase. He's been saying it for several decades. And he usually would say it to me if we hadn't seen each other for a while, or if he could just tell I was happy to be around him, which is pretty obvious, I think. You could always tell. Maybe we'd be golfing, going to the beach, barbecuing, stuff like that. Didn't matter. He'd throw that out there at least once. And then, just being in his presence, being around Dan, be it adult, child, stranger, animal, pretty much meant the same thing. Warmth, quick wit, big laughs, and just enjoyment. But, like with the big laughs part, I mean, Dan and his cats. Cats don't have a sense of humor, so that's their loss, okay? What did Dan love? Obviously, his first love was his family, his wife and daughter. There was his world. It was his pride and his reasons for life. Then, of course, there's his mom and dad, nieces and nephews. He spoke so well of his in-laws, some of whom I met briefly, some just never have, but sure, if I do, I'll have a story to reiterate to them that Dan had told me. Moving on, his aunts and uncles, of course, his cousins shared a special place in his heart. He always spoke with them with a smile on his face. And oh yeah, Dan loved his cats too. And then his brother, Mike, I guess.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yep, you knew it was coming, Mike. You proofread this. All right. That's why there's so many spelling errors.
I didn't use spell check.
No. And
I read it.
you're awesome, Mike. I love you. You're a good guy. Dan, hardworking guy. And I'll wrap this up soon, I promise. Dan was an extremely hardworking guy. I don't know if he ever called out or just didn't show up because of a small reason, I'm tired. I don't think he ever did that. Guy always worked. As far as I know, from when he was 15 and up at, until the end. I saw him in action many times, kind of like a Tom Cruise in Cocktail type, and swinging stuff around, but kind of looked like Ben Roethlisberger a little bit, so. And Dan was well aware of that joke. It's actually on a Yelp review that I wrote about him at David Burke's. True story. Nonetheless, he was a credit, his moral compass was strong. He's an extremely hard worker, put it all in there, which I think is a credit to his parents. They raised such a dedicated, hardworking, just truly stand-up guy. Never complained, never passed on any momentary issues or whatever was going on onto other people. He just didn't do that. He's a kind of like a stiff upper lip type, strong, resilient, and the type of guy I just loved having around my family, without a doubt. Let's talk special skills. In another life, Dan would have been an outstanding comedic writer. I mean, if you think about it, whether it's movies, TV, stand-up, he saw the world in a different light and was able to capture the humor of pretty much every scenario. Positive or negative, he could do that. I mean, it wasn't an abstract guy, but he could always twist it, put that little twist on it, and it was great to hear. He was a grill master. Never seen him burn anything on the grill, and please believe Dan and I have eaten a lot together. Let's see, I've seen him cook on just about everything. Wood, open fire, gas, electric. Why does this matter? Because I know he was proud of that. It's kind of a funny little thing, but at the same time, he's an awesome cook, especially on grills. He's just excellent. Like myself, I would almost describe Dan as a lazy athlete. Like, isn't like I don't hit the gym, Dan didn't hit the gym, and we're not involved in anything organized sports-wise. But if there was a game going on to participate in, maybe a little basketball, wiffle ball, impromptu wrestling match amongst friends, he was down for it. He'd be in there. Yeah, and don't want to forget about like fishing, camping, lawn darts. He loved it all. Always a good time. And while he was very proud of his probably like biggest athletic achievements in wrestling, he didn't live in the past. Some folks sometimes get caught up in those things, and Dan didn't do that. While he was extremely proud of it, he was always nonchalant and humble about it. His coaches and teammates liked him very much, as far as I know. He possessed so many great qualities of being just a true participant, but a leader that me watching from the stands in a lot of his wrestling matches could certainly admire and appreciate what it was he was doing and how he drove himself and I think others around him. All right, in closing, this is the hard part. He is gone from this world, but not from our hearts. He lives on through memories, looking forward to sharing pictures, stories. Until my last day, he'll definitely be present in my mind and my heart. When my days end, I'll see him again, and he will have his arms open, eyes full of endearment, and that sinister Dan grin will definitely be on his face. What a great guy. All right, Mike.
Thank you, Jeff. Good job, man. Thank you, buddy. Well, hello. Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming to give Dan a send-off and just celebrate his life. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan's older brother, Mike. Make sure to say older because he's been taller than me since junior high. Which, to attest to the humor that Jeff was mentioning in his best man's toast, he was sure to point that out at my wedding. Being the mature individual that I am, I got him back good at his wedding when I gave the toast for him and Whitney. Again, sorry, Whitney, but he got me. I had to get him. But that's Dan, right? He was always making a lighthearted jab, always keeping things funny, and that was really our relationship. Laughter followed every exchange. We were always there for one another and always just kept the humor going. As Whitney and my wife Rachel can attest to, and much to their dismay, we never outgrew our obsession with toilet humor, inspired by Dad, and again, sorry, Mom. Camping trips to New Hampshire with our dad were the highlights of our childhood. It's a tradition that we carried on throughout our 20s, introduced our friends and families, and eventually our own families too. Dan loved the outdoors, whether it was sitting by a campfire, grilling during a visit, which would almost inevitably become an extravagant, like, multi-meat course, or just, hacking around on the golf course or playing leisure sports like wiffle ball. In high school, wrestling was everything. We were brothers, friends, and teammates. We pushed each other and we made each other better. Wrestling is another thing we did not outgrow. Of course, the risk of injury increased as we aged. One of Dan's former teammates recently noted that Dan was a leader who demonstrated how to push themselves beyond their limits for the team. This is an attitude that Dan carried on throughout his life. He was willing to do whatever was needed to get stuff done. I can't count the amount of times that he helped load or unload a moving truck, paint a room, clear a yard, install an air conditioner. It just goes on and on. Call him for help and he'd be there. Sometimes he'd be there to help just because he knew that you were going to need it. You didn't even have to ask. His career was in the service industry. He selflessly served all those close to him. When Dan met Whitney, there was no doubt, just in me talking to him before meeting her myself, that she was the one. Whitney may have rolled her eyes more than a few times when their co-workers at the time would remark how lucky she was to be dating such a hilarious guy. But Whitney knew the inner Dan, the real Dan, right? The guy, the caring guy, the selfless guy, the one who would show up and work hard. Interesting, when Dan first introduced Whitney to my family and I, he was embarrassed to bring Whitney to our very small apartment with pets and kids. And it's the irony here is years later, he would spend most of his 30s yelling at their dog, "Gus, get on your spot!" And then, a little while after that, earned the nickname Danny Two Cats. There's no pictures here, but I'll show you later if you ask. There's a lot of pictures of him with his two giant Maine Coons, Bogey and Palmer. A lot of pictures. Saw a lot of them this week. Dan loved his role as an uncle. Looking back at photos this week, it wasn't surprising to find that we have a picture of him with each of our children on the day they were born. Dropped what he was doing and came and visited. Auntie Dan and Uncle Whitney is my oldest son's name for Dan, not Dan and Whitney, but Dan, Auntie Dan and Uncle Whitney, when he was about 2 years old. Was always ready to give shoulder rides, wrestle, and provide fun on every visit, and sometimes bring obnoxiously loud toys. My youngest son, Roran, has recently declared that Uncle Dan is our climbing gym. Growing into the role of a father himself was his greatest joy. Though he did have to deal with the realization that unlike an uncle, you have to change the diaper, you can't pass it off. Dan adored Raylan. She was his sidekick, always ready to snuggle together for a nap or do yard work where he would give her wheelbarrow rides to make it more fun. Almost every outing together meant a stop at the store for Raylan to pick out a toy. She had his heart, and as a father myself, it was awesome to see him embrace the new role and go all in as he always did. Our relationship was strong, though our conversations frequently consisted solely of quoting cartoons and movies. We continued to show up for one another. I will miss Dan more than I can put into words. Thank you.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Charlie, Jeff, and Mike. Thank you for sharing. We'll now enter into a moment of silence so that we may hold all that was shared, as well as the memory that we all bring to this gathering. Let us enter into communion of silence together. When you arrived today, you received a memory card, and on the back there is a responsive reading. I invite all who are here to rise in body and or in spirit, and we will share the responsive reading together. I also would like to greet the folks who are in the live stream, who are here present in the live stream. Thank you for being present this morning. The congregation will read the text that is in bold. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, in the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now part of us as we remember him. Unable to perceive the shape of you, I find you all around me. Your presence fills my eyes with your love, and my heart is humbled, for you are everywhere. Dan will be with all of you, with all of us, especially with all of you, everywhere and always. Let us go from this place remembering that love is strong as death, that to find joy in one's family, to extend care and concern is the greatest vocation of our lives. Let us remember Dan as we do and give thanks. Amen. Amen. I invite you to be seated for the postlude. That concludes the service, but the reception follows immediately. I'm going to invite all who are here to greet the family, and then you'll continue right on to the reception in the community room. You'll do so by forming a line around the perimeter of the sanctuary and then coming up this way. There are a lot of you here. I am going to ask that those of you who have seen the family already or will see Michelle and Charlie at church, for example, or at choir, those of you who will be close by to refrain from getting onto the receiving line. That would be a demand of endurance that might be too much for Whitney and Charlie and Michelle. So I'm going to also ask that those of you who have not already signed the guest book in the lobby to do so on your way out, and to thank you once again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your care and concern and for joining your grief with the families. Thank you for being here, and go in peace.